Well, you know what I like to do is have you guys do the talk for me. I love the questions and answers, because then I get to hear you speak. So I'm open if anybody has something they'd like to talk about or something that they have a question about. I've
been doing some reading, and I learned that there's different types of Buddhism. I was wondering if there were any particular differences between them and, I guess, what we practice here.
Well, the essence of all the forms of Buddhism, the essence is the same. I mean, the same Buddha is a teacher, and his basic teachings that we call the Pali Canon, those are the ones that we use primarily, are recognized by all the different forms of Buddhism. But within the spread, you see Buddhism practiced it looks different, a lot of different places. So Buddhism left India less than 1,000 years after the Buddha had died. So the first country it moved to outside of India was Sri Lanka, which is where our monks are from. And then it also spread to China. So there were two big branches we think of. The one that spread towards China and northern Asia, and the other that went through Southeast Asia but started in Sri Lanka, started in India. They all started there, and then kind of moved out as the monks traveled out and as invaders came into India. Eventually, a lot of the monks and the nuns were pretty much killed off, and the monks had ended up having to kind of escape very often if they didn't go out just to teach. So the tradition that we are is Theravadan, and so that's the group that went to Sri Lanka, and then Burma and Thailand and Laos and Cambodia. Those are the main countries that practice this form of Buddhism. And then the ones that first went to China and into Tibet and Japan and Korea. Who am I missing? Anybody? And Vietnam that's the Mahayana tradition. And Tibetan Buddhism was sort of its own thing in Tibet, so it's often called Vajrayana because it really included a lot of its own the teachings as they were in Tibet before Buddhism. So it's still under the umbrella of Mahayana Buddhism. So the differences are often more cultural than anything else. So, and Buddhism has adapted as it went into different cultures. It would adapt with the culture, and I think that's because Buddhism never tried to claim to be a religion and take over and tell people they were forced to drop some other religion and take on Buddhism. So I think it made its way into most cultures rather easily because it was more a kind of way of living than it was like you've got to believe. It wasn't our God's better than your God. What?
It doesn't compete with.
Right, it shouldn't compete, right? And those are the main. Mahayana Buddhism has there are beliefs that there are more enlightened teachers that have come after the Buddha, and so a lot of their teachings are recognized and may be recognized with the same level of acceptance. And for Theravadins, the Buddha is our main guy still. And we're not saying that there aren't other enlightened people or teachers, but we always go back to the teachings of the Buddha, the historic Buddha. And that's what we focus on. That's where our attention always is.
What sect was Thich Nhat?
Thich Nhat Hanh? He's still alive, isn't he? When you said what was he? He hasn't. Okay. He's Vietnamese, so he was He's Mahayana in that tradition. But interestingly, in Vietnam, there's more of a mix. Sometimes it's almost like the two forms of Buddhism sort of met in Vietnam, because I've met different monks who grew up in Vietnam, and they've become Theravadan monks, but they kind of are happily mixed with their brothers and sisters in Vietnam. So I think there's some blending. And if we have a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh books that we use here because his teaching is so poetic and really beautiful. But his tradition is the Mahayana tradition.
I think technically it's Zen.
Right, because they're most of the Mahayana traditions are a form of Zen, aren't they?
And there's also Pure Land.
Yeah. So that what we call Zen is Japanese, and then Chan is the same form of the Mahayana Buddhism in China, and in Korea they practice Korean Zen, and Vietnam would be the same thing. I don't know what they call it. What's the Vietnamese word? What?
Tien.
Tien. Mm-hmm.
What classifies a practice of Buddhism to be Zen, to follow Zen tradition? Because I feel like it's like separately from other Buddhist practices, like its own thing. So what distinguishes it?
Well, all of the different Zen practices are considered Mahayana, but it's not a separate thing. It's just a separate form of Buddhism. So I don't. So if you're, I don't know how to distinguish. I mean, the Tibetan Buddhism is not Zen. There isn't a form of Zen in that. And all Japanese who are Buddhist are not Zen. There are a lot of Pure Land Buddhist and. Mm-hmm.
I was reading recently about two schools of the Chinese variant of Zen that got taken to Japan. That what sort of made them slightly different from one another was an attitude toward enlightenment. One of the schools is Soto and Rinzai. I can't remember which is which of these beliefs, but one believes that enlightenment is something you reach gradually through time, while the other is a belief that is sudden and instantaneous, which doesn't really, talk about like the process. That's just one part of like their schools. I was reading about Bodhidharma, who, from what I was reading, he's supposed to be like the one who took this form of Buddhism to China that originally, that would grow into something that was recognizable as that. And I think it was saying that there was a lot of focus on not sort of action from the practitioner. There's a story where he's talking to a distinguished Chinese nobleman or even emperor, someone with a lot of power, and the emperor asks him, how much merit will I gain if I encourage the building of Buddhist schools, monasteries, and the translation of Buddhist texts from the Indian language into Chinese? And he said, absolutely not. And then to prove that point, he stared at the wall for 9 years. Which is the story.
Those are wonderful stories, aren't they? Yeah.
And I don't exactly know how that is then, but it seems to be something that's very inward focused as opposed to a external interaction with the world, at least at its first steps, and maybe at its totality. It seems like a deeply inward journey. And then, maybe it's instant or gradual. That's about all.
Depending on the school of the teacher, and lineage is real important. Yeah. I don't know much about Zen. And I know a lot of Zen practitioners, but it's a little unfathomable for me.
Yeah, but more so, most of what they do is there's something specific they do, and then it's
Well, their meditation is usually silent and longer than we will do. But of course, we do silent meditations and we do others. But Zen is probably more. You're just sitting longer periods of time without any kind of guidance.
I heard a phrase, and I'm wondering if you've ever come across it, and if you have, what you might think about it. The phrase is Theravada is for psychologists, Tibetan Buddhism is for artists, and Zen is for poets. I heard that it goes around, I guess, American circles that talk about Buddhism. It intuitively made some sense to me. I was wondering if you've ever come across the phrase.
Not that phrase, but I like it. I like that the Theravadins are thought of as those psychologist ones. Because, if you think about Insight Meditation Society, those are basic. The people who began that, or people whose tradition is Theravadan. So if you go to an Insight meditation group, they'll say we're basically Theravadan, and they learn from their teachers in Southeast Asia, usually in Burma, some in Thailand, and some in Sri Lanka. But a lot are psychologists. So a lot of the people who, it's a layperson-led group, but their tradition is the same as ours. And then there's a lot of beautiful Tibetan art, and it's very colorful and I can imagine that that's very appealing to someone who's a visual artist or any kind of artist would be drawn to that. And what was the other one? Zen is for poets. Well, look at Thich Nhat Hanh. That's one of our examples. And
I remember in college reading Zen. I'm like you, it's hard to describe Zen, but I read Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance, and from that I could get just a little bit of inkling about what Zen was all about. But I can't describe it to anybody else. You'd have to almost read the book.
yeah, that's how quantum physics are for me. There's a little kernel there.
I think Mahayana, especially Tibetan Buddhism, puts more of an emphasis on bodhisattvas, people who could become enlightened, but they're delayed their enlightenment so that they can help people in this world gain enlightenment also. And so a lot of in Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of energy is putting into learning about the attributes of all the different bodhisattvas, and even where they live in a mandala, and then imagining yourself as that bodhisattva until you become that bodhisattva. So it's a very interesting visualization meditation. We don't do any of that in Theravada meditation.
Right. If you're working with a teacher in this tradition, and you said you had wonderful visions and things like that, they'd probably tell you, well, you'll get over that, Uh-huh.
So I know here the Bodhisattva vow has been offered and taken by several practitioners, probably more than several. What is the difference in understanding of a Bodhisattva between the Mahayana school and the Theravada school?
That's a good question. And I would love to ask Bhante Asaji, but he told me I can't do that to him anymore. I think when we talk about it, we respect the bodhisattvas, and we have Kuan Yin. We have a given by Malaysian students outside our temple, and that may or may not be unusual for a Theravadan temple to have a bodhisattva outside or inside, but we don't have the teachings and the training that go with them, like Todd's talking about. So, and when we talk about the bodhisattva precepts, the first time we did that was a little bit of a surprise for me, but we talk about that as the 10 perfections, which we have in Theravadan teaching. So I think we use the term, the bodhisattva vows, maybe it's a little looser than than it would be if you were Mahayanan. I mean, but I think I like to call those just the 10 perfections. We take the training to work with those 10 perfections. So the difference is that we don't put the emphasis on those different bodhisattvas and do the training and the, all the symbolism in them. And it's fine, but it's just not the focus that we have.
Would you say it's somewhat parallel to the way the Catholic Church venerates saints, with Christ leading at the center?
Don't you think that's do you think that's a little bit the way it is, Todd?
No.
He was originally trained as a Tibetan Buddhist, so. No.
The saints are someone who lives in heaven, right? Forever. And of course, in Buddhism, there is no living somewhere forever.
But other than that.
And so the bodhisattvas are usually described as deities, although I think that's a bad translation, not deities or gods. They are bodhisattvas. And they can, in Mahayana teaching, they can emanate or come into reality anytime, any place, and help people, because that's their mission. So I don't think the saints can do that. I suppose the saints can pray to heaven, to God. I don't know. I'm not a Catholic, but they're not the same thing.
Well, I think they're sort of the same thing. I've been studying that a lot because I'm trying to make Buddhist holy cards, like the Catholic holy cards.
To me, in that description, the bodhisattvas sound, if you're going to make parallels or try to draw similarities between Catholicism and Buddhism, I think you see that as more of an angelic trait as opposed to a saintly trait, where kind of the idea of an angel can help, but there is, too many moons have passed since any type of Catholic teaching. I don't think there is that miracle that is required to become a saint for something to be an angel. And again, this is beyond me, but that's kind of in my feeble brain. That's how I would draw that parallel.
Yeah, there are specific rules as to who becomes a saint, right? They have to.
Yeah, miracle, right? Is at least one of them. But yeah, I don't know how you become an angel. I know it's not. That's good that you brought up angels, but if you do call on saints for protection, so they have that. People call on them through prayer, and they become. You call on St. Jude if you have, like, for lost causes, and St. Francis, and there are many of them. And so they're kind of there the way a bodhisattva would be. But I don't think there are lots of beautiful parallels, I think, in all religions, where you have kind of layers of beings who are there to help you on the way. So, but he knows about bodhisattvas, and I respect Todd's knowledge in all things Tibetan Buddhist, but I think saints are a little bit like bodhisattvas. That's just my opinion. There are a lot of Catholics who become Buddhist. I think we could have a good discussion around that if we had some. If you were raised Catholic? Yes.
Yeah.
You're probably going to find a very high number. Would be my guess on all figures. Well, because we're geographically we're located.
Well, just the people who said they were raised Catholic is at least a third of this room, the ones that, yeah. So, yeah.
I find the precepts very similar to the Ten Commandments. It's a lot of other things that are very similar to Catholicism. So I think there's a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences.
And a lot of differences, yeah, which is probably what makes it comfortable for. And the Theravadan or the Theravadan branch of Buddhism tends to be called the conservative branch of Buddhism, and I think it's conservative in the fact that we go back to the teachings of the Buddha, and which to me is great because he taught a lot, and it just makes it easier than deciding if you want to pick a competing. I don't know how people who are Mahayana followers decide who they're going to pay attention to. So I really like it that I can go back and read the teachings of the Buddha and decide for myself, this is what the Buddha said, and he taught this a lot of different times, a lot of different places, and that gives me plenty to work with. So I think conservative in that sense that we always refer back to the teachings of the Buddha, and most scholars and the people who look at the works, they feel that the Pali Canon, we don't think of it sacred the way some Christians think the Bible is, but it's pretty accurate. Probably the teachings are consistent with what the Buddha actually did teach. And if things were added, they can kind of see, well, they fit in with the teachings. So in that sense, it's considered conservative. But in all other things, I don't think of myself as conservative, but I'm comfortable with that label with Theravadan Buddhism.
What is the name of the collection of the Buddha's teaching?
We call it the Pali Canon because it's written in Pali, and the canon just includes all the different teachings, and it's the Tipitaka, depending on how some people pronounce it, the Tipitaka, but it's the Tipitaka. Do you say Tipitaka? And that includes that's what we call the three baskets. So they're the teachings that were for the monks and nuns, the Vinaya, and then there's the basket of all the teachings of the Buddha, and then the other basket is like the Dhammapada and the Jataka tales, and there are other, the Therigatha and the Therigatha, the teachings of the senior nuns and the senior monks. There's some smaller. The third basket includes all those different collections and things. And the Abhidhamma, yeah, which is the kind of like the psychology of Buddhism.
Is this commonly found in a book?
Not in a book, but if you wanted all of the teachings of the Buddha, that's probably maybe. The ones that have been translated into English would be about 6 or 7 big books. Big books. And the other baskets wouldn't be quite as large, but you can find them, you can buy them.
I think you showed me a website, or told me about a website at one point that had multiple translations. It was really ambitious. It was,
the Sutta Central.
Yeah, Sutta Central. Yeah, that's a wonderful resource for beginning to delve into the Pali Canon, because it is so large, and the way it presents multiple translations of the same thing really gives anybody who wants to investigate it a lot of options in terms of how to look at it and think about it.
Yeah. Did you hear what he said? It's called Sutta, Sutta, Sutta Central, and it's suttacentral.org. I think it's, yeah. And
try 2 or 3 endings, you'll probably
yeah, Sutta Central. And one of the good things about it is they've now have you can listen to it being read. They've got it in voices. So if you want to listen to the suttas, you can do that. But his goal is to put it into the website is Bhante Sujato, who's an Australian monk, is translated. He has translations from other people as well, but his goal was to put it in as many languages as he could, so he's got a whole lot of people around the world who work with him on this project. But it's really good. It's in different languages, but they're all also in Pali, which is the language that when we chant, that's Pali, and the teachings are all in Pali. So that's the language that's our liturgical and our chanting language, and liturgical and canonical, I guess. So it's a bit overwhelming if you would see all that material, but that's a good place to start. And if I was going to do a talk tonight, I wanted to talk about you can find one thing about Buddhism that you're drawn to, maybe one sutta or one of the list, like the 4 Noble Truths or the 5 aggregates or the 5 hindrances. And instead of being overwhelmed with how much there is, just pick one of those things, one aspect, maybe one of the 10 perfections, and just study that. Just look at that, listen to talks about it, and see why it's important in Buddhism. It might be the 5 precepts or the bodhisattva vows, the 10 perfections. But just pick one little piece of it, and let that be the way you enter the river, the way you step in the river. And remember, all those, it's like all roads lead to Rome. And the way the Buddha talked about it is any of those ways we find his teachings, we're stepping into a river, but all those rivers lead to the ocean. And the ocean has one taste, and that's salt. And so that way, any of those little small teachings or ideas can be the thing that's what you can work with and go from there. I think that's wonderful, wonderful teaching, because otherwise you can just get overwhelmed.
I really like the Eightfold Path, but question: do you know, are they short, the 5 aggregates and the 5 hindrances? I've never heard of those.
And there's a really good talk, maybe a few on our podcast. I know Bhante Bhatia did one recently on the 5 hindrances, and the 5 hindrances are the things. They're 5 things that can keep us from making any headway with our practice, with our lives. So sensual desire, aversion, sloth and torpor, and restlessness and doubt. And you can, that's a wonderful place to start, even just one of those. So you can, and these lists, you can find the list everywhere if you just think. I found another list on some site today. I'll have to bring it because it's like 4 pages of list. And there have been books written about the list, because the traditional way of teaching oral teachings was to memorize everything. So if you had a list, it's much easier to memorize list, right, than just big pieces of literature. But those are good places to start. The form, feeling, perception, consciousness, and dharma. So that's what our That's our body and our mind. That's what we're made up of. So and so those are the 5 parts of everything that's compounded. That's a good one too. So just grab one little thing and you can work with it for a long, long time. Thank you, everybody. Now, I have one thing. I don't know if we have many announcements, but the Taste of Sri Lanka is coming up on March the 9th. And right now they're working on getting all the things together for the auction and what is the other thing, Todd? It's the auction and the silent auction, right?
The live auction, the silent auction.
Silent auction are the smaller items, and you can go up and put your name and bid for it, and then you can see if you want it at the end. But this is about the time that we begin to get real seriously asking people to think about what you have, or think about something that you have that you would love to generously give it to the silent auction, or usually the auction, the live auction, we have sort of big ticket items, and the silent auction are things that are set up on tables and you can go and bid for them. But you may have a wonderful service, something that you do that you'd like to offer, and you can put if you have a retail price you think it would be, or if you're a dog sitter, or if you're a painter, or if you do massage, or if you work in a nail salon, or you give haircuts, all those things are dog walker, all those services. Sometimes people put together a collection of something, maybe some wonderful essential oils, and maybe information about what the different oils can be used for, and then they can be in a nice basket, and that's a very attractive thing to put in the silent auction. In the live auction, we've had people auction like a weekend at their timeshare, or a vacation that's taken care of with a place to stay, and other things might be big items like a TV or something big. And the auctions are wonderful. The mayor of Woodstock does the live auction. He couldn't be there last year, but he's doing it this year, and he's great. He's really a good professional auctioneer, so it really makes the program fun, and it moves it fast. But that's our biggest fundraiser for the year. So just think about things that you have, or know somebody who has something that maybe they got married and they got too many of the same thing, and they'd love to give some of that, their overstock to the Buddhist temple. And do you have a deadline for that?
It would be the week before, so that would be the
Second? Try to get the things in by the 2nd. And that money is used for the temple. And it's really our biggest fundraiser. And a lot of what we get is from the auction. So